Well, let me set the stage anyway while you're looking, because we are at the loft, right? This is your home too, I assume. You live here as well as work here, right? This is the nerve center. Anyway, Ed Lachman, this is your workspace we're sitting in right now, and you have a manila folder set up for each film that you've worked on. Is that the idea?
Well, over the years,
that's perfect.
Doing interviews and
sure. You've done a few.
I do a few. When I do research for a film, maybe you don't have to be there.
Oh, okay. If you hold it on like that with your elbow in your lap, as long as that's comfortable.
Sure.
I mean, yeah.
No, it's fine.
Thank you, Noah. Noah's the intern. He's just trying to help.
Over the years, I always do a lot of research with the director, and especially with Todd Haynes. So I start a folder for each film, really actually a booklet with ideas, research. So then at the end of the project, when you actually have to then come up with ideas like why you did it after the fact.
Oh, you can repurpose it now. Oh, that's interesting.
I see. You doing it and intellectualizing it are two different things.
Yeah.
So then that's another evolution to the ideas with the project.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, many times I even interview Todd with myself to get all our ideas out. So when we go out and we talk about the film, we're kind of in sync about what the thematic, the aesthetics.
The aesthetic. Right. And I'm thinking, I'm looking up above you. There are some bookshelves, just painting the picture. And I see there's a plaque or some sort of sign of Carol, which is 2 films back, your 2 collaborations back. You did shoot Wonderstruck. You did shoot that one, right?
I did shoot that one.
I thought so.
I'm
right here in front of me, too.
It shot me, too.
It shot you? I wonder what you mean by that.
Well, I don't know.
Okay. Play on words.
You always have a few holes in you when you finish a film.
I would imagine you would. But I'm just thinking, okay, that movie was a period piece, and so that must have been far more work. But then, of course, that's nonsense because
But
it has nothing,
if you look at the work I've done with Todd since Far From Heaven, they've covered the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, to the 70s.
And that was all in the I'm Not There movie, just that, right? Almost every...
almost all those, and I'm Not There, the epic poem essay to Bob Dylan.
Right.
But, so it's always researching because Todd doesn't look for his approach through just cinematic language, but through the demographics, the political, the social, the art movements of the time, and all those give us ideas about how we're going to look at the period to tell the stories. Because images to me aren't about representation, but they're about creating the emotional and psychological context for the story and for the characters that allows the viewer to participate in the story.
Okay. So you have open right now one of these folders, correct? With that, the research, is that one of them right there, just arbitrarily? Because I was going to ask you if maybe
I was going to plagiarize. I just was at Cannes. I had a tribute at Cannes.
Yeah, I heard about it.
Got this award at Cannes.
Which award was it?
Well, the Ingenue and Cannes give an award for the last 6 years. And last year was Chris Doyle. The year before was Peter Szczycki. The year before that was Roger Deakins. So I have Philippe Rousselot. So I was in
great company.
A great group. But, this was an unbelievable honor because historically, believe it or not, even though France is the birth of cinema, maybe disputable,
Arguably.
but it certainly could be considered.
Lumiere, rather,
the
and the
Millet
Millet,
brothers.
Méliès, whatever, however you pronounce.
They don't have like an actual award for cinematography. And so Ingenue, the lens manufacturer, approached Cannes also through a French, Pierre-William Glenn, Truffaut's cinematographer, who's actually very active in Cannes. He's head of all the projections at Cannes.
Oh.
And they instituted this award for cinematographer, which is more of a lifetime tribute to your work. And so actually I was going to, what you asked me what I was looking at, part of my speech was about, what do we do as cinematographers, which I thought that might fit your show, right? That's what you want to talk about.
Well, I'm just going to speak for the
we
people
could talk
listening.
about anything.
That's exactly what I was going to say. For those listening to this, they're going to. I should say we could talk about whatever you want, whatever on your mind. But this is perfect, sure.
But I thought, well, why not talk about that? That's at least that's
it's a good way in.
Something I almost know something about. So, not to sound obvious, but of course we translate our stories into images with the director's vision, a production designer's shape and form, the crew's skill and artistry, and the emotional sensitivity of the actors. But for me, the challenge of cinematography is revealing or trying to evoke the poetic or psychological authenticity of the image in the story you're telling. So I thought that would be a good lead-in.
It is a good lead-in. Can you give, where do you feel, and this is tricky, of course, I understand all questions are going to be tricky, but where do you think you may have come the closest, where you felt like that you had achieved that really, really, to a level where you really felt satisfied? Can you think of an example like that?
Well, I want to get this out.
Okay.
Images aren't just about pleasing aesthetics, pictorial aesthetics, but somehow how you create the emotions in the story through the language. Because to me, what makes films different than theater or literature, it's the images that create the metaphors, the subtext for the story, filtered through the optics of the camera, using space and light and time. So I don't know if I can say there's certain films I've worked on that I don't know if they reach an audience, and then there's other films that reach an audience and you're surprised that it had such a response. Mm-hmm. Like Carol has this kind of universal response from people. It captured somehow the idea of what first love is, about the tenuousness of how you feel in a relationship. In that story, it deals with these two women's affections toward each other, but it's more universal the way it reached people. And it found the cinematic language to embrace those ideas. But then I look at a film like I'm Not There that probably didn't have as great a success, but was one of the greatest challenges for me, because we look at this essay poem of Bob Dylan filtered through the language of the 60s and 70s, culturally, politically, socially, how he affected the culture and how the culture affected him. And Todd's brilliant idea was to not show Dylan in his creative life through different personifications of who he represented, because he would reemerge and reinvent himself through every period and through every album, and really shun what he was, so he could move forward
He sort of
creatively.
Shed his skin, in a way. Every few albums,
Yeah,
it would be a new. Right.
And so the challenge for me is that Todd wanted to use the cinematic language because, in a way, Dylan was an actor. In a way, he was recreating his own persona through a new image he would create of himself. And so what better way to do that was through the cinema of the 60s and 70s, from Godard, the Nouvelle Vague, and its sexual politics, to the Italian modernism of Fellini and Antonioni, and to the neo-Western, 70s Westerns of Peckinpah and Altman.
Sure.
So here I was coming to the set, and I had just shot in black and white the day before, Masculine, Feminine of Godard. And now today I was reinventing, Altman in McCabe and Mrs. Miller. So that was kind of a real mind fuck. Can you say that on your show?
Yeah, you can say that.
That was a real mind fuck visually, like to re-enter a different world cinematically in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So that film really speaks to me also because it was my youth. I was growing up in New York, going to art school, and I was listening to Blonde on Blonde over and over again. But for me at that time, and even until I shot this film for Todd, I never thought you could put images to a Dylan song because Dylan created the images himself through his music. So by Todd reinventing the idea of Dylan through these different characters, he's really allowed us to create what the language was visually of who Dylan was becoming. Does that answer that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. There's no
I know there's
exact
no right
formula on this, right? But just as a side,
but I mean the point is that, and I think I said this maybe, is what's so brilliant about working with someone like Todd is we both were in art school, we both studied semiology, which is kind of the signs and meanings of what images
Vassar?
represent.
But you were
no,
in a
he went
school.
to Brown.
Oh, Brown, right? That's right.
Yeah,
with
he went to
Christine.
Brown and Christine Vachon.
That's where they met.
I went to Columbia,
Harvard,
Ohio University. It was the 60s, so I was like dropping out of school, like whatever I was dropping in, I was dropping out.
I understand your parents must have been thrilled. You drop out of Columbia. Okay, landed in Harvard. I just think that's kind of funny because I'm thinking, oh, well, your parents, felt, phew, we dodged that bullet.
Well,
and
Columbia was like the last resort because it was, I had finally come back to New York, and so.
By the way, was Dylan ever on the set of that film, or did he come to see the film afterwards? Did he ever?
He didn't even want to see the film.
He had no interest at that point.
He did see it.
He did, but he didn't care.
But
just so
he
happens.
gave us. I mean, look, Jeff Rosen was our contact, his manager, and obviously Todd was very nervous because he had gone through his other project. In which he couldn't use the music, so he had written, Velvet.
Yeah, Velvet Goldmine.
Yeah, Velvet Goldmine. Yes.
Hugh, you weren't on that one, so it's okay for you to forget.
All right. So, so he wrote like a outline and gave it to Jeff, and Dylan approved it. And the amazing thing is, Dylan gave us all rights to all the music, anything that he had said. In fact, all the dialogue in the film is actually from what Dylan had ever said or written or was in his music.
Oh, right. anything that Dylan said in the movie.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so he never wanted to be involved. He when Todd reached out to him, he said, "It's your vision," and left it at that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
he didn't impose any point of view or editorialize.
Right. Yeah, no, I got it. Speaking of Velvet Goldmine, he also didn't get the rights Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story either, right?
Right.
So he had been, that was two, two cases. Second
right.
time was shame on me, I guess. So he wasn't going to go down that road a third time, right? I actually remember the time of when Carol was coming out, and I sat with the screenwriter who wrote it again. What was her name?
The screenwriter was
Patricia. No, Patricia Highsmith. No, obviously she's long gone.
She was
but who? Phyllis.
Yeah, Phyllis.
I sat with Phyllis. I think
Najee.
I sat with
Phyllis Najee.
I sat with Phyllis Najee for the podcast. I did something with Todd and with Christine. I was really lobbying for you, and I think you were traveling at the time.
Oh,
so it's been a few years. I've been trying to get you on the show, and I forget how I. You gave me your email address. I guess I was at one point asked Susan Norgett because she he's always going to those New York Film Festival press screenings, and which I go to generally too. And I do remember seeing you there. You would wear a very noticeable hat. Your hat, the fall hat, I guess, right?
That's so people don't know I'm bald.
Oh well, you didn't go for the hair weave. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I go that far.
So Todd, your relationship with Todd, do you think is it a matter of it's all about the chemistry, right? He gets you and you get him, and you're able to achieve things.
Well, he challenges me.
He also
in
pushes
ways
you
that
still.
Because every project he approaches in a different way and tries to find a language to tell the story, and that to me is the best thing that can be for a cinematographer. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think of a cinematographer like another actor. You give a certain kind of performance, mm-hmm. and your relationship with the director, some people say, oh, it's a marriage. I wouldn't go that far, but I would say it's a dance partner.
Oh, okay.
That you hear the same music, but are you in step? Do you complement each other as a dance partner would? Mm-hmm. And Todd and I don't always agree, but what we come up with is better than I think either of us have it. But he does his homework. He comes to the set with ideas, with a shot list, and so there's a way of going further with it,
mm-hmm. Yeah. So the shot list he comes up with, generally speaking, on his own? Is that how it works?
He loves to do his own shot list, and then when we're in the set he's very open to alter it depending on the varies of the situation, the
mm-hmm.
time, and
right.
the coverage. But he's very he conceptualizes how the story and the language of what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I do my own look. He does a lookbook. I do my own lookbook.
Well, I was going to say what your this folder, it sounded like kind of a lookbook meets, I don't know.
Yeah, I do.
A research
We all do kind of, the art
mm-hmm.
department does one.
Right.
I do one. Sandy Powell, the wardrobe designer.
Right.
Costume designer. We all do our own lookbooks, but obviously he, being the director, has to have the overall view of what he takes from us.
Yeah. Judy Becker.
And in fact, in a strange way, when I go to talk to a director, when I read a script, let's say I'm being interviewed,
mm-hmm.
I always go to that meeting with the director with a lot of visual ideas of how I see the film could be expressed through images.
So when
And not all directors are visual. It's really interesting. Some directors look at me like,
wow,
no, like, are you trying to do my job?
Really?
Or I'm sure I've lost some jobs because they think I'm imposing. And that isn't my position. My position is I at least want a dialogue. I at least want to show I have ideas, even if they're not your ideas. But then let's use that as a basis to discover what makes this story specific visually. Because to me, all stories are unique in themselves to find the visual language. It's like one writer writes with a certain form and sound and shape to his words. And it's the same way for me what a director seeks. And I also, maybe this is unfair, but I think in Europe they have a longer tradition visually. If you really think of the American idiom in maybe abstract expressionism, maybe Hopper before that, that we really didn't have our own visual, how can I say, movement, so to speak.
I see.
And so I think we came out of a more literary background. It's even the way scripts are written, interestingly enough. Scripts are written differently for the most part in Europe. Now, I'm talking again in a independent way.
Okay.
But scripts here are written purely through dialogue. When you read a script from Bertolucci or Werner Herzog or Ulrich Seidl, it's written in description and setting as much as the dialogue. So I always thought that was always odd, that we're talking about a visual medium. Now, to the other way of thinking, Godard doesn't write scripts anymore. The last 20 years, he says films are about images, so he goes out and actually shoots ideas with his images and shows that to his producers to say that's the form that I want to tell a story in. I don't know if that got complicated.
No, I like to let it also,
Free association.
Well, that's fine, but I mean, I also like just to let it sink into and think about what you're saying as well. I want to come back to Ulrich Seidl because that's another collaboration that you have. But since we were, it's obvious, and for my show, since Todd has been on twice and Christine's been on twice, just so happen because I love that whole. What these guys are doing is very, I enjoy it so much. And
I think Ulrich Seidl is an Austrian director.
Right.
Is one of the most interesting contemporary directors in Europe today.
Yeah. How did you meet him, by the way?
Well,
before you start,
he's mixed narrative and documenting reality in a way that. The way they interface each other. Like, he has a concept, an idea for a story that he researches. And then he tries to find the people that are those characters. And he uses actors only when he can't find the characters to actually play themselves. Or if it's a more complicated kind of character, he's got to use an actor. But then he uses the actors with the non-actors, but shot in the real locations that the events could happen in.
Yeah.
And then what is unique about what he does is he shoots the scene without dialogues written. So it's improvised, the dialogues. And after you do a take, maybe 2 takes, he says, thank you very much, and you come back the next day and reshoot the scene. And if the actor or non-actor says, what would you want me to do? What do you want me to say? He would say, what would you do? Mm-hmm. So he's documenting something about the interior world of the character, who they are themselves, in the situations that he sets up. Mm-hmm. And he does these tableaus visually, which I always say is like how someone could walk down the street and look at something. And then he uses a handheld camera that participates in the action, but not knowing where the people are going to end up. Mm-hmm. And so I find people are disturbed a lot of times by the subject matter, and they're not quite sure if he is exploiting the people because they're so emotionally raw. But I find him one of the most moralistic directors without being a moralist. Mm-hmm. He's moral without being moralistic.
As a sort of
because he's showing something about the frailness of our own human nature. Mm-hmm. And I think there's such an honesty. I mean, we always say films are about the illusion of reality, but what is the reality of the illusion? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I find he holds a mirror up to the audience of things that we don't want to see in ourselves. And I think that's why he's so compelling.
So how do you where do you enter into that as once again in your collaborative
I did a film with Larry Clark, Ken Park.
I've heard about it. Yeah. I apologize.
You don't want to admit that you saw it.
I have a 14-year-old son, and no, I'm kidding. No, and Harmony Curran was involved.
Yeah, he wrote the script.
It. Yeah, no, I'm very familiar with it, but I have not. I actually have not seen it. Honestly, and
it has been widely shown in this country.
No,
been shown.
But you have do you have a directing co-direction?
Yeah, I co-directed
credit?
it with Larry. It was something I met Larry Clark at. I was in this art fair in Graz, Austria, and I ended up at the same table with Larry Clark. And Robert Frank and Larry Clark were the two people why I got interested in photography. And because they imbued subjectivity and personal connection to their images.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I said to Larry, your books, Teenage Lust and Tulsa, were like films in a way.
Yeah.
There was actually a story between the pages, you know. Mm-hmm. I said to Larry, have you ever thought about making a film? Mm-hmm. And he goes, hey, man, I always wanted to make a film. How do you make a film? I go, oh, it's easy. Just hang out with me. What are you into?
Yeah.
And he said he was into skaters. I said, well, I was a skater when I was younger. And for me, I wanted to weigh into Larry Clark in what his world was. And so I was more than willing. So I said, did you ever keep a diary of your, like, what happened to you growing up that are in these books? He said he did. So we went through his...
Did you have a sense that he might have done that, or that was just...
No, I said his images were like a visual diary, because he told me he used to... His mother was a baby photographer, and he would go after he would work with his mother and hang out with his friends and do drugs and take pictures. And so I said, did you... So he had kept a diary of his
very good
friends and his, group. And so I said, well, would you show me those diaries? So he showed me. So I said, look, we could use this for the context for ideas for a film, because I had just seen a film from Bloody Kids by Stephen Frears. He had done for the
love him, yeah,
BBC. And what I loved about the structure of the film was it told different stories that became one story. So about these kids. So I thought we could use the skate park as the nucleus for the story, and we could tell different stories of how these kids are connected through the skate park.
kept saying the word kids and this.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
So he had met Harmony in Washington Square Park, and I happened to kind of know Harmony because he was like a PA on Light Sleeper, Paul Schrader's film.
Yeah, right, which he shot. Yeah.
So he said, we were like old guys. Why don't we give the diaries to somebody younger? I think this kid can write, because we saw some of the things he had written. Mm-hmm. And let's see what happens. So Harmony wrote the script, but then at that point in time, nobody knew who Larry Clark was in the cinema world.
No.
People barely knew who I was. And with that material, we couldn't get money to make a film. So then Larry met Gus Van Sant, and Gus gave him the opportunity, because it was AIDS-related projects, to do kids. And he went back to Harmony. Harmony wrote the script, and then they took off. Then right. Larry was the great auteur,
Yeah.
So then after that, we got to make Ken Park.
Wow.
So that was the evolution of it. But anyway, you asked me about Ulrich Seidl, so I'm sorry I got off on that tangent. So
you have to stop. You have to get out of the habit of apologizing, because if you listen to any of these shows here, you'll know that you're in great company of abusing the stray.
I'm not worried about it. All right.
No, I